Before I kick off, I'd like to pay my respects to the owners of the land. Listening to all the other speakers, I've realised my three things aren't necessarily things that you can go and do straight away right now, which when we're talking about Indigenous stuff is actually probably a really, really good thing, because I think there's a lot of people who jump in a little bit too quickly without enough preparation or organisation in what they're actually doing. So the first thing I want to talk about what we need to do when it comes to Indigenous stuff, this is actually one that people can do really, really quickly. Unlearn everything you think you've learned about Indigenous Australia, which if you went to school in Australia, that should probably only take about 3 minutes or so to unlearn all that, because there really isn't much. But all the stuff that we have learnt not being directly taught, all of the assumptions, all of the frameworks of understanding we have for looking at Indigenous people, Indigenous issues, that does take a little bit longer. And the first step in that is actually realising that that is exactly what they are. They are frameworks of interpretation that is not the actual truth. And that is what IndigenousX is all about, not trying to give it any sense of this is what Aboriginal people think, because there are a lot of us and we all think very, very different things, but actually exposing people to the variety of views. So when it comes to a lot of other viewpoints in Australia, we don't think about the white viewpoint because we see so many different versions of it that we know not to think that way. But when it comes to Indigenous people, we have so few people who are actually allowed to take the stage, who are given the opportunity, and they have to fit in this very, very small framework if you're ever going to get up there, that we don't have this diversity of opinion. So when you hear someone say something, it'll either be told that's not what Aboriginal people think, and I've been told something I think isn't what Aboriginal people think, which is a really interesting thing to be told from non-Aboriginal people. But it shows you how strong that framework is and how we just take for granted all the things that we see. So first step, unlearn, relearn. But when you're relearning, don't think that truth is now the truth, because you're going to have to unlearn and relearn that as well. So some people are thinking, haha, I've probably already relearned this one, I know that. But did you actually read the tiny, tiny little bit down in the bottom there that you can't actually read now? That says, this is just a sort of visual representation of what it actually is. Don't use that map to say, this is the country that I'm in, or this is where the people there live. It's not. There's a lot of people really upset about this map and the fact that it's inaccurate. And it was created, it's a really great teacher's aid, so that you get the gist, but it's not accurate. And was not intended to be, because there's so much dispute, and no one's really sure about a lot of the boundaries now. There's a lot of discrepancies around it. So even when you're relearning, understand that even that is a process. And so when we're talking about, now I'm not sure how many people actually get the point of that pun, lest we forget over the past. Our history is framed in a way, whenever we're talking about, Indigenous massacres, invasion, whatever it may be, that's in the past, get over it, of course, compared to lest we forget. The last massacre, formally acknowledged massacre in Australia, happened in between World War I and World War II. When we did atomic testing on Aboriginal people, we let the British do atomic bomb testing in Australia. That was well after World War II. The intervention that happened not very long ago at all and is still ongoing. So how we frame the past, how we allow these discussions to be had, whether or not our stories are given a place of honour and respect, or a place of, oh, you're just trying to stir up trouble, you guys need to get over that, that's holding you back. It is a really, really challenging thing that you're going to need to confront yourselves, that a lot of things that Aboriginal people want to talk about are things that other people don't want to hear. But having that respect and that reverence for that history, that people will actually start to embrace it and start to take the time to appreciate it and to engage with it. And so, when I'm talking, I don't say, I don't want to convert people, I don't want to be a leader, I don't want followers. But what I would like, I think what all of us would like, is to be understood and respected for where we're actually coming from. And so again, the framework, particularly at the moment for fair-skinned Aboriginal fellas, is entirely dominated by a very, very demonising space where we're here for all the free stuff, we're here for the fraudulence, we're here to fear special, we're here for all of these reasons, and this is why we identify as Aboriginal, this is why we say these things, and no one actually comes to us and says, well, what is your actual motivation? So for me, I'm Aboriginal because as little as I could remember, Dad said, I'm Aboriginal, you're my son, so are you. There was no political motivations, there was no consideration of services or programs or anything. That is how my family raised me to identify myself as. That has been a core part of my identity as long as I've ever been alive. So again, hearing those stories, opening yourselves up to new perspectives, and taking for granted that where you're at with your understanding on Aboriginal people, unless you've actually spent time, unless you've actually read, unless you've actually had a diverse amount of conversations, you've probably got some very heavily preloaded assumptions, and being open to actually unpack those and let those go. This is the big one for me, and it's something I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of different organisations about, and again, I think is the crux of the framework of where we need to get to and how we as a collective group, not Aboriginal, white, non-Aboriginal, wherever else we may, but as a group of individuals, is to move beyond this really, really simple framework of charity, of giving hands out, of Aboriginal people need a help, of I want to go and help Aboriginal people. You know, the amount of times I'll hear someone who, when I'm talking, very, very proudly will go, oh, well, I went and volunteered for 6 months in an Aboriginal community out in Northern Territory or out in WA, and it's like, didn't you have any Aboriginal people in your own town? They go, oh, I didn't think about that. And so if we can't make it a part of our day-to-day lives of actually engaging with people at a human level rather than, you know, the charity tourism space that exists where people want to come in, be a saviour, feel really, really good, and then leave again, that's not a model that's actually going to get us anywhere. That's a charity model. What we're talking about for Indigenous peoples, what we're talking about for a lot of other people, is a really, really simple framework of justice denied and frameworks for how we can actually achieve justice for people who have that denied them. And so when people say all the time, we're talking about the stolen generations, oh, but how could you possibly put a dollar amount on so much suffering? And I understand what they're getting at, you know, how can you put a dollar amount on such pain and suffering and intergenerational trauma? But the answer is through the civil courts, like everyone else does for mental anguish and trauma and suffering. So we actually have frameworks to achieve justice that when we talk about Indigenous issues, we have these really, really simple ways to cut it out and not actually explore the issue any further, rather than looking at, well, what actually could we do to achieve justice in this issue? So reconciliation, no reconciliation without justice really feels a little bit like, you know, no dessert until you eat your vegetables, but that's really what it is. So I think so much about the reconciliation movement, not just through Reconciliation Australia, but how we think about it, how it resonates within Australia more broadly, is at this, you know, sea of hands, crossing the bridge, you know, getting along together, being friends, and that's lovely. I like friends. But there's lots of people out there who I'm not friends with, not because I don't like them, just because we can't all be friends with everyone, but I can still stand up for them and speak out for them when they are suffering an injustice, from regardless of what their background is. And so more than symbolism, more than gestures, more than friendship, what we have are large groups of people actively denied justice in very, very practical day-to-day ways, be that through land rights, be that through health and housing, be that in education, be that deaths in custody, be that child removals, which are much higher than they ever were during the stolen generations for very much the same reasons. These are things that we can actually act on in direct ways. And so while you can't go and give justice to people, you can stand behind those people who are fighting for it. You can help amplify the voices. You can help encourage different events that you go to and say, oh, are you having any Indigenous speakers? Are you having an acknowledgement of country? Are you having a welcome to country? Are you having a diverse amount of Indigenous speakers, or are you having the same ones who come in every single time? So what I'd like to leave you with, because I've been going, is IndigenousX. Please follow it, please interact with the account, please come into that space with us, but understand it is not there as, you know, elders sitting on the mountaintop handing out gems of wisdom to you every time. These are real people telling real stories about their day-to-day life. You don't have to agree with every single person we have there, that's not the point. But you should aim to understand them and respect them and engage with them and give them their space and their recognition. So, thanks everyone.